Morning everyone, and welcome to the Strategic Policy and Resources Committee of Perth and Kinross Council on Wednesday the 12th of September. I'd just like to welcome you all here, and I'd like to introduce Karen Reid, our new Chief Executive, who's sitting in at the top table for her first committee, and welcome her to the Council. At this point, I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank Barbara Renton and Sheila Devlin for stepping up into that role over the summer period, and to thank them for all the hard and sterling work that they did during that 2-month period. We now move on to the minutes of previous meetings. Sorry, we'll do apologies and declarations of interest.
Thank you, Convener. We have apologies from Councillor Bailey with Councillor McDade substituting. We have apologies from Councillor Purvis with Councillor Jarvis substituting. And we have apologies from Provost Malloy.
Okay. Do you have any declarations of interest on any of the items of business before us this morning? Councillor Parrott.
One financial interest with respect to item 8.
Thank you. Okay, we move on to minutes of previous meetings. We have the minute of the meeting of the SP&R Committee on the 13th of June for approval. Agreed? Thank you. We have the minute of the meeting of the Property Subcommittee of the SP&R Committee from the 26th of February for noting. No, we'll go back one. The Executive Sub of the SP&R Committee on the 20th of August for approval. Agreed. And then we have the, as previously stated, the one on the 26th of February, the Property Subcommittee for noting. Then we have the minute of the Property Subcommittee of the SP&R Committee of the 14th of March for noting. We have the minute of the meeting of the Provost Subcommittee of the SP&R Committee of the 27th of June 18 for noting. We have the Employees Joint Consultative Committee of the 30th of November 17 for noting. We have the minute of the meeting of the Corporate Health and Safety and Wellbeing Consultative Committee of the 12th of March 18 for noting. We have the minute of the Integration Joint Board of the 23rd of March 18 for noting. And we have the minute of the meeting of the Tay Cities Region Joint Committee of the 18th of May for noting. And then moving on to this morning's agenda, we have the Revenue Budget 1819, which is report number 1 on the agenda, and I'd ask Stuart Mackenzie if he would like to introduce the item for us. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, councillors. I take it everyone can hear me. Thank you. This is the first report updating the committee on progress of the 2018-19 Revenue Budget. There's a fair amount of detail in the report, so I'll just cut to the main points. As set out in section 2, the projected underspend on service budgets is currently £988,000, mainly due to an anticipated underspend in education and children's services. This is a lower level of underspend than reported at this time last year. Approval is sought for a number of budget adjustments arising from the 2017-18 final accounts, and also to recognise approximately £1.6 million of additional funding announcements since the committee last met in April. In line with the strategy for funding the capital budget, it is proposed to transfer the estimated underspend on loan charges of £3.7 million to the capital fund. This underspend largely reflects the move, where appropriate, to budgeting for the repayment of debt over a maximum period of 50 years, as reported to Council in December. Approval is also sought for a number of variants to reflect changes in the structure of the Council and for the application of earmarked reserves. The projected overspend on adult care is currently £1.4 million, reflecting pressures on older people's services and complex care. The arrangements for managing this position are set out in paragraph 3.6 of the report. Including functions not delegated to the Integration Joint Board, the total projected overspend on health and social care is approximately £1.8 million. However, this figure excludes up to £400,000 of additional funding approved by the Executive Subcommittee. Overall, the net projected overspend in 2018-19 is currently £508,000. This is an early projection, which will be updated as more information becomes available. The Council's revenue budget will continue to be monitored and managed closely by the Executive Officer team over the coming months. Happy to take questions, Convener.
Place on record my thanks to officers across the whole Council for their continued excellent management of our finances. And whilst at present we are projecting a small overspend, this is based on revenue monitoring at the end of the first quarter, and the position will undoubtedly be updated as we go forward. I'm also confident that our reputation for strong and prudent financial management will continue to place this Council in a healthy position. Do we have any questions or comments on the paper? Questions first. Councillor Ros McCall.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, a very strong financial report, but obviously that highlights the overspend on the IJB, and I accept the 3.6 with all the points there. But are we confident that this is actually going to sort the situation out?
Thank you. In terms of the projected overspend at the moment in adult care, Councillor McCall, thank you for your question. There is a process to go through in terms of the integration scheme, so we need to start working through that process. And the first part of the process is to identify mitigating action. So we're working with colleagues to try and attempt to do that.
Okay. Do we have any further questions? Councillor Band.
Thank you, Convener. Can I refer to page 51 and item 3.9, and can I ask what the forensic team is? Third bullet point in 3.9, page 51.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you. Could I just ask Mr Mackenzie, with regard to the IJB, a lot, would I be right in saying, is going to depend on the Barnett consequentials from the UK budget, and it does appear that the UK government is going to make a greater expenditure commitment on health services, but that's going to be a key factor.
Mr Mackenzie.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson, for your question. I think moving forward, that will certainly be a consideration in terms of the resources available both to the NHS in Scotland and to local government in Scotland. But this issue is really about the management of the in-year position.
Appendix 5, and you're talking about which? Yep. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Local authority residential homes.
Okay. Additional income is being generated across the 2 local authority residential homes due to the financial profile of the individual residents and increased occupancy levels.
Yes, because we were told before it was under occupancy, and that's why the officer brought forward the closure of these last year. And I was wondering how we got from the position. Sorry, I was wondering how we got from the position of under occupancy and been unable to fund these homes to now we're 182,000 above budget in income.
Okay. If we have an answer to that question. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. Because of the rationalisation, we are now we've improved occupancy both in the two care homes that we have, and also at this current time, and as a point in time, we have more people with their own income contributing to the placements. So as we outlined the last in our report around the review of care homes, we had fewer self-funders in the care homes than we do at the moment, but it is a point in time and that can change at any time.
Councillor Lane?
Thanks. A supplementary. So what percentage of increase has this been in the saving that we were achieving, that we needed to achieve? The original saving over the closure of them was...
Yeah, this income hasn't been as part of the original saving. That was made through other means. This isn't now additional income to the running of the two homes.
Okay, I think if you require further specific information, Councillor Lane, I'm sure we'll be happy to
Okay, I was
supply
just wondering what the income was. What I really didn't phrase the question very well. £182,000, what percentage of that income is that we've under budgeted for? The percentage that we're over budget?
I think we're dealing with quarter one, so we're not probably in
But that makes it even more, 182,000 in one quarter. We're getting up near...
is a flexible figure.
It's nearly about 800,000 in an annual year that we've wrongly... We've underestimated the funds we could get in.
I suspect that's not the case, but...
And that's a full year projection, the 182,000, and we will come back to you with further details, Councillor Lang.
Councillor Parrott.
Thank you, Convener. I'm on page 45 at para 2.3.6. It's nice to see the additional funding of 1.5 million or thereabouts coming in. But can I ask, why is that described as cost neutral? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Parrott, for your question. It's really about budget presentation. So we show the main funding or income sources as part of the budget. So when we have revenue support grant and we receive additional funding, which is the item above this, we would adjust revenue support grant to show the income, and we would adjust the service expenditure separately to show the expenditure. This income will go directly to services. So in terms of budget presentation, it's income matched by expenditure. So the effect is neutral.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you. Page 42, 2.1.7. It's a question I asked in the last financial year. I ask again on the Pupil Equity Fund. There is a grant from the Scottish Government to help the most disadvantaged kids and to help push them up to improve attainment. There's a grant of 1.66 million. We're projecting, though, there'll be an underspend there of 106,000 for the full year. Can I ask why that is?
In relation to the pupil equity funding, Councillor Johnson, you remember, or perhaps I'm being presumptive that you remember the answer I gave the last time, in that the funding doesn't always match with the school academic year. And so the first tranche of funding that we got came in partway through the academic year when schools had already set out their school improvement plans, and this funding came after that. What I can report is that 90% of last year's funding has in fact been spent, and of that 47 schools have managed to spend all of their funding. The projected underspend at this stage, which may or may not remain for the remainder of the year, represents about 6%, 6.5% of the total budget. We understand that the planned underspends are in relation to staffing again, and the ability where certain schools have identified that they want to recruit a range of additional staff. It has been with difficulty in recruiting that. It hasn't been around buying any additional resource or providing other activities for the young children.
Thank you.
Could I, page 43, and it's a purely factual question, but at the very top, 2.1.9, service-wide budgets, overspend of 340,000 due to challenges in the identification of procurement savings, I'm not sure who to direct the question to. It's just that if we could get a bit more detail on that and what these challenges actually are.
Okay, Mrs. Renton.
The service, the old environment service, was given almost, sort of 60, 70% of the procurement savings to be made across the council. That had been based on, sort of procurement across both revenue and capital. And when we've done the further analysis, a lot of it is actually capital that our, sort of contractual arrangements are in. The overall budget and saving figure was 1.4 million, and to date we have made 1.1 million savings. So what we're doing is saying, sort of because of that, because of the, sort of the uneven allocation between revenue and capital, the fact that we've already delivered that 1.1 million in terms of waste contract, the Pooler House contracts, for example, are good examples of that. We're seeing that the last £340,000 is proving to be a bit harder.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Sheila McCall. Oh, sorry, Councillor McDade first, because he did ask first. Sorry, my apologies.
Thank you, Convener. My question is on page 44, 2.2.7, the Modern Apprenticeship Programme, underspent by 172,000 last year. My question is, we're proud to be a living wage employer. Do we pay our apprentices a living wage? And if we don't, would we have underspent that money last year?
I think we have someone to respond. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. The council doesn't pay its modern apprentices the living wage. We have an agreed wage rate for modern apprentices that is significantly higher than the statutory rate for modern apprenticeships, and this is very much in line with how other local authorities remunerate modern apprentices. We keep a close eye on that. The reason for the underspend is due to the pattern of recruitment and modern apprentices coming in at different points throughout the year. And we use the underspend to effectively move it into reserves and to fund the continuation of training places, which can take between 1 and 2 years in the following year.
Sheila McCall.
Thank you, Convener. My question is in relation to item 3.6 on page 50. The first bullet point states the Chief Officer and Chief Finance Officer must take remedial action to prevent the overspending materialising. I'd like to get some clarity on what the remedial action will involve and what the impact might be.
Could you just repeat where it is on that page? Sorry, I was slow to get to it.
It's on page 50, item 3.6.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mackenzie, have you... Sorry, Mr. Valentine.
Thank you for the question. We're working hard, recognising the significant overspend, to look at all possible actions that can be taken and to bring them forward for consideration. It will be a challenge, and some of those considerations will be difficult, but we work with colleagues collaboratively with the Chief Officer, Chief Finance Officer and the partnership team, with PKC colleagues to consider all possible recovery actions and the impacts that they may have for full consideration.
Supplementary, please. Yes. I'm afraid that doesn't really answer the question I asked. I wanted to know what remedial actions were under consideration, because it states quite clearly here there's a process, a clear process in place, and so there must be some remedial actions that are under consideration. I don't know what those are, so I would like to understand what they are, please.
I think at this stage it's too early to talk about the specifics of those remedial actions. They're going through a process of discussion. But across all of the budgets, we are, taking every action to minimise spend. The pressures that you see before you are, unanticipated demand pressures, these are kind of largely driven by what's happening in our communities, and it's difficult to respond immediately to those demand pressures. And it's difficult today to talk about specific actions, but the team are working hard to identify them and bring them forward for consideration.
Councillor McCall, I'm sure that in the fullness of time, you'll be given an update, as will the rest of us, on what remedial action's been taken. Okay, well, we're dealing with quarter one at the moment. Okay. Overspends in my.
I'll speak loudly. Can you hear me now?
You're on now.
I'm on now. I would like to understand what the timetable is, because there are a number of very vulnerable citizens in our city and in our communities throughout Perth and Kinross that would be affected potentially by some of the remedial actions. So it would be quite useful to understand what the timetable is and when you might bring forward some of the remedial actions you're considering. Thank you.
I mean, I think it's absolutely, you know, in the circumstances of the overspend and the impact that some of the decisions may have, that the request for a timetable is absolutely recognised, and we will bring that forward in a formal manner to share with colleagues.
Okay, thank you. Now move to Councillor Dugan, who asked the next question.
Thank you, Convener. It's a very simple question on page 42, paragraph 2.1.6, the projected carry forward on the DSM budget of over $500,000, representing 0.60%. Is that accurate, meaning that the DSM budget is in the order of 100 million?
For me, please.
Sorry, Convener, it's 2.1.6, the 570,000 carry forward. Yeah, 0.60%. Is that percentage accurate? Meaning the DSM's in the order of 100 million?
I can answer that question. Councillor Dugan, the total DSM budget is actually about £88 million. And so I understand that that is an accurate figure.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Lane.
Thanks, Convener. It's just a follow-on from Councillor McCall's. I think it is important that we're kept informed, because at 3.7 on page 51, regarding the overspends to the budget, it falls back that these will have to be funded by the council if remedial actions, etc., are not taken. Yep. So I think it is very important that we have a time frame. It just says in bullet point 2 on the previous page that in the event that remedial action cannot prevent the overspend, the IGB will present a recovery plan to the partners. It would be interesting when that recovery plan would be.
Well, presumably once they've got it formulated, they'll be able to present it to us, Councillor Lane. And as you've already heard from the previous responses, at this present time they haven't. Yep.
Okay, thank you, Convener. Councillor Lane, I have arranged to meet with all senior staff to discuss the remedial action that needs to be taken to bring in a balanced budget. We'll be having that meeting within the next 4 weeks.
Thank you, Convener. Page 67, right at the top of the table, care at home. There's a projected overspend on externally purchased care home services, but it goes on to say there's an underspend on internal care home teams. Does that mean that we could perhaps look at doing more of this ourselves? Does that suggest we're more efficient at doing it than external providers? And should we, or have we looked at doing more of this ourselves?
Thank you. The underspend is due to recruitment, and we're currently recruiting a significant number of staff, 17 members of staff to the care at home, the home assessment recovery team.
If that's okay, are we having problems recruiting? Is that what you're suggesting?
There has been, yes, it's well documented. It's a national problem in terms of recruitment, and over the last 12 to 18 months, we have had various campaigns around recruitment, and we're now able to recruit to those posts.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. We now move on to the paper 5, which is the Composite Capital Budget of the Housing Investment Programme, and I'd ask Mr Mackenzie to introduce the paper for us.
Thank you, Convener. Again, this is the first report updating the committee on progress of the progress with the Composite Capital Programme and Housing Investment Programme in 2018-19. That's what happens when you don't move over your pages to the right comments. The gross budget for the 10-year composite programme is currently estimated at just over £608 million, with movements in the phasing and funding of expenditure being summarised in section 2 of the report. Net expenditure on the composite programme was £80.6 million in 2017-18, or more than 100% of the budget. It is proposed to adjust the programme for the carry forward of expenditure, grant funding and receipts from 2017-18. Section 3 summarises progress to date with the composite programme. Net expenditure to the 31st of July is approximately £13.3 million, which is broadly comparable to the position this time last year. There are a number of proposed adjustments to service capital budgets for the profiling of expenditure in early learning and childcare, the award of additional grant funding for strategic timber routes, the consolidation of the budget for Perth City Hall, and the reprofiling of expenditure on vehicle replacement. All of these adjustments are detailed in Appendices 1 and 2 to the report. Section 4 sets out progress of the Housing Investment Programme. The budget for the 5-year Housing Investment Programme is currently estimated at just under £72 million, with net expenditure on the programme in 2017-18 of £23.1 million, equivalent to 96% of the approved budget. It is proposed to accelerate expenditure across a number of housing programmes in the current year, including a proposed increase of £3.3 million to the Council House buyback scheme. Subject to approval, budgeted expenditure on the Housing Investment Programme in 2018-19 will increase from £13.9 million to £18.9 million, as detailed in Appendix 3 to the report. Expenditure to the 31st of July on the programme is approximately £5.6 million, which is in advance of the equivalent position last year. Happy to take questions, Convener.
Okay, thank you very much. Just at this point, I'd like to place on record my thanks to officers across the Council for their sterling efforts, again, in delivering this hugely ambitious capital programme with record levels of capital investments in our assets and infrastructure. The excellent work of officers is being maintained as we project a further £68 million of expenditure on the composite programme and almost £19 million on the housing investment programme. Happy to take questions at this point and comments later. Any questions? Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you. Could I ask the Head of Finance, with regard to the capital programme, what assumptions the finance team are making now with regard to the Tay Cities deal?
Mr. Mackenzie.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson, for your question. Thank you, Convener. The assumptions we are making on the Tay Cities deal haven't changed in terms of an underlying assumption about funding coming forward for a number of projects. We have an assumption of approximately £52 million of funding for the Tay Cities deal coming forward. However, that will be subject to negotiation and the outcome of the cities deal. So the commentary and the underlying assumptions have not changed.
Just to give you further information, the Tay Cities deal negotiations are ongoing, Councillor Donaldson, and I think it would be fair to say that they have intensified over recent weeks, but we're still not fixed a date for a conclusion of that.
Yes, can I just as a follow-up on that, because they've been ongoing for a very long time. Indeed, I came across an article in the Courier at the end of March that the heads of agreement would be signed within weeks. And yet we have a situation that the local MP, Pete Wishart, he's also chair of the Scottish Affairs Select Committee in the Commons, is being denied access to Treasury ministers. But can I have an assurance from yourself, as not just the convener of this committee, but as leader of the council, that when we come to our budget next year, we will have a unified budget combining capital and revenue, and a major part of the jigsaw, the Tay Cities deal, which we didn't have this year, will be there as well.
I can only deliver what's in my gift to deliver, Councillor Donaldson. it's certainly been my ambition to conclude the Tay Cities deal as soon as possible since I came into this seat. And if I appear vague in that respect, it's because it's not in my control. As far as delivering the revenue in the capital budget at the same time next year, that is my intention. Councillor Lane. Sorry, Councillor Parrott first. My apologies.
Thank you, Convener. I'm on page 78 at para 3.3.5. Whilst I'm delighted to see a rebate of £81,000 from Hubco, I thought all of our arrangements through Hubco were on a fixed price basis, so I'm slightly surprised to see that and would ask for clarification. Thanks.
Could you just repeat the page and the item again, please?
Page 78, para 3.3.5.
We're, as part of Hubco, we're a partner within that. So if they make a profit, then we get our share of that profit back. So that's what that is.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Lane.
Thank you, Convener. It's page 78, paragraph 3.3.3. I'm disappointed to see that the budgets for the city lighting and the Venals are being used in part to consolidate the budget for the City Hall. This reflects, in my view certainly, the way that cash was taken from the Letham Centre and the Blairgowrie Recreation Centre and the PH2O project to fund Perth High School. I think this is a wrong move, and can I ask, have you consulted with your Conservative city councillors on this, and are they in agreement with this?
I have, and they are.
That's good to know, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions, Councillor Ros McCall?
Thank you, Convener. Can I draw attention to page 81, 4.8? I was pleased to see that there's social housing projects going forward for former educational and children's services buildings, which makes a lot of sense. Can I just have a little bit more information on that, please?
Thank you. As you will be aware, then, those buildings were declared surplus by Education and Children's Services, and the process that we have when a service declares anything surplus is then offered to other, parts of the council. Housing and Environment then said, yes, these are useful to build houses on, and so that's what we're doing, and I think that, it is a very good use of our resources. It actually then cuts, the issues that we have in terms of excess properties that we no longer need to run bits of the service, but other parts of the council could pick up, and that's what we've done here.
Councillor McDade.
Thank you, Convener. My question is on page 78, 3.3.3. It is also about the 550,000 for the Perth City Venals. What does the 550,000 get us in terms of what is that money actually going to get us for the City Hall area? Because my understanding is the Venals are not part of the City Hall project. It's obviously part of the wider environs, and why is that then being moved? And my follow-up is, have we looked at ways of saving money from that 550,000 by perhaps using local artists such as the students at the college, which could provide us a saving here and would look better publicly?
Okay, as far as part of the budget is concerned, I understand it's for resurfacing some of the Venals, etc., but I'll leave that. Barbara Renton will maybe be able to.
We're going to do, Fiona and I are going to do a kind of double-header on the response. Fiona will pick up about the public art arrangements. This is a consolidation of the budget, within the Perth City Plan, there is the lighting, and the Venal strategy and placemaking. And there is the lighting strategy as well that was approved by the former E&I committee, about 2 years ago. What we're doing is then using that money and transferring it to the City Hall account so that we've got due governance. So it's not additional money, it's not anything that we weren't going to spend, it is just putting it within the overall, remit within the Perth City Hall board, to make sure that the timings of all of the work that's being done is aligned. But they were always within the programme and the project that we had stated through the lighting strategy and the placemaking monies that were through that were agreed as a budget decision about 2 years ago. within that, then Fiona will answer.
Yes, thank you for the question, Councillor McDade. As Barbara has said, this is really about making sure we've got good governance around the whole City Hall project. So there is part of the City Hall development is about the public realm. There are 3 Venels in particular, Kirkgate, Fleshers, Venel and one other, which will be resurfaced and improved, along with resurfacing and improving the area around the City Hall building itself. It just makes sense for that to be managed as a single project. And we did the same thing with Perth Theatre, wherein we had a single senior responsible officer for the Perth Theatre building, but also the public realm works immediately outside the theatre, just to make sure that everything was finished on time and in the right way. So that's why we're doing it that way. As Barbara says, it's not new money. On your question in terms of opportunities for local artists, for public art commissions, absolutely. And there will be an open call programme, because part of the drive behind that part of the programme is to offer opportunities to local artists to develop local talent, but also to bring artists of Scottish and maybe UK reputation to the area as well, because that does bring benefits. But that part of the programme is yet to be scoped in detail, and we'll keep you updated on it.
Councillor McDade.
Quick supplementary, please, Convener. So just to clarify, now that since it's been done under the project board from governance point of view, does that mean Hubco is undertaking this work? Is that why we're moving the money?
The work will be procured through Hubco, yes.
Okay, Councillor Duff.
I'm looking at item 4.6 at page 80 of the report. It's to do with the purchasing of ex-council house stock. I'm delighted to see that the council's support for affordable housing under the council's buyback scheme to purchase ex-council house stock. The increase of over £3.3 million, I'd be interested to know what sort of percentage increase in the overall budget for purchasing council house, ex-council house stock that is.
Thank you. I'm sort of looking for a little bit of advice from behind me. Yep. We have, sort of an allocation of funding, sort of for housing, sort of for new build, sort of, and part of the reason for an acceleration is we're just drawing down some of that money because we're, aware of what the programme for that build is. In terms of the buyback, last year we bought 41 properties back, sort of, which obviously then, sort of increased our housing stock by that amount. The year to date we have, sort of bought 19, we've got 6 under offer, and we know that there are probably more that are going to come through that way. So it's a really good, and effective way, particularly where, sort of we're obviously buying back where we have our own stock anyway. So it enables us to support our tenants in a more cohesive way there as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Comments, Councillor Barrett?
Thanks, Convener. I'm very pleased to see the investment in our Future Homes Fund being allocated to specific construction projects with over £250,000, which will deliver 8 new flats in the city centre in Milne Street, with just a third of that cost coming from the council tax for Affordable Homes Fund, demonstrating the effective deployment of second homes income to deliver more affordable homes to rent. The Mill Street development will see modern homes replace an incongruous former church building, and the area and the streetscape enhanced as a consequence. We're also making inroads into meeting special housing needs by the development of new affordable homes in Invergowrie to facilitate the move from institutional care to living in the community for people with learning disabilities. And again, the council tax from affordable and empty homes monies has been used to deliver homes for rent in our area and to defray some of the exceptional costs of building these specialist homes adapted to provide independent and dignified living for people with disabilities. I'm pleased, as other members are, to see the accelerated progress in the investment programme to bring forward around £5 million worth of investment for kitchens not included in the main upgrade and replacement programmes to catch up with them, and also the bathroom improvements and external fabric improvements being brought forward into this year. 1 million of resource previously allocated to the mortgage to rent scheme will now be targeted more effectively to accelerating former council house buybacks. I'm assured that this will still leave adequate funding to service the demand for mortgage to rent support identified through early intervention of our homeless prevention services. It's also worth noting that the additional £1 million for triple glazed windows will provide that form of a better heat retention in the buildings to around 200 homes, and an average of £5,000 for triple glazing. This seems remarkable value to money to me. Paragraph 4.8 summarises the projects to convert 3 properties, including 3 properties to council houses, providing another 10 units of housing in Perth City and also in Rattray near Blairgowrie. I'm happy to support the report. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, any further comments? Councillor Duggan?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. It gets back to the question that I asked earlier on. I remain disappointed, and I'm unmoved by the explanations from officers, which seem to me to be skirting dangerously close to answering the question that you wanted to be asked, rather than the one that you actually were asked. I don't think anybody from the elected members suggested that this was new money, and the notion somehow that we can only achieve proper governance by putting these 2 funds into the City Hall Fund it would leave some of us with serious questions about how we look after various tracts of money. So I'm not content to proceed on that basis, and I'd like to move an amendment. You need to move it.
Move the report. Sorry, I would need to move the report. I move the report. Do we have a seconder? Happy to second. Okay.
Yeah, my amendment is that we agree the report with the exception of paragraph 3.3.3, whereby we leave the Venel and city lighting budgets and projects by implication intact, and also then leave the City Hall budget as it is. I do.
Yes, Convener, I'm happy to second that. I don't understand the requirement to move a further over £1 million into a budget that's already 21.5 million. I think the public deserve absolute maximum amount of scrutiny of these budgets when we're talking about £500,000 here, £500,000 there. To the public, that's a lot of money, and I don't see any governance reasons really for moving that money into a single consolidated pot. They should be able to see that line by line.
Okay, I'm assuming that amendment's competent, and we'll move to a vote. From the floor? No. I think it's clear cut from the papers why we're doing it, so I don't see any, and just move to the vote.
Thank you, Convener. Councillors, we're dealing with item 5 on the agenda, which is the Composite Capital Budget. You have a motion by the Convener, seconded by Councillor Barrett, that you approve the terms of Report 18/285 and the recommendations therein. You have an amendment by Councillor Duggan, seconded by Councillor McDade, that the committee approve the terms of Report 18/285 with the exception of the proposals in paragraph 3.3.3 relating to the movement of the budgets for the Perth City Venels and the Perth Lighting Action, and that those be retained underneath their current project headings. When I call your name, can you please indicate whether you're voting for the motion or the amendment? Councillor Band. Amendment. Councillor Barrett. Motion. Councillor Donaldson. Amendment. Councillor Duggan. Amendment. Councillor Duff.
Motion.
Councillor Forbes. Motion. Councillor Jarvis. Motion. Councillor Ling. Amendment. Councillor Lyle.
Motion.
Councillor McCall. Motion. Councillor McCole.
Amendment.
Councillor McDade.
Amendment.
Councillor Parrott. Councillor Shires. Councillor Stewart.
Motion.
Thank you, councillors. I have 8 votes for the motion, 6 votes for the amendment, with 1 abstention. The motion is therefore carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. In line with the agreement between the Scottish Government and COSLA, all councils are required to submit an annual efficiency statement. As has been the case in previous years, the Scottish Government expects every public body to deliver efficiency savings of at least 3% and to report publicly on the actions undertaken and the results achieved. For 2017-18, the Council has reported recurring and non-recurring efficiency savings of £12.074 million, which represented around 3.6% of the 17-18 net revenue budget. The return, which is set out in Appendix 1 to the report, was approved by the Executive Officer team and authorised by Councillor Lyle as Leader of the Council and Ms Devlin as Chief Executive. The return was submitted on 16th of August for consolidation into the national position. The committee is asked to note the contents of the report.
Thank you very much, Mr Walker. Just to confirm, this is the annual efficiency statement and it's been submitted to COSLA for consolidation in the National Local Authority return. The return is attached to Appendix 1 and the report is for noting. Happy to agree. Councillor Lane.
Thanks, Convener. It's just to confirm that on page 105, under Other, the 4.9, is that the reconfiguration of the debt repayments over the 50 years, and that'll only be obviously achievable once?
So what's in there is the loans fund savings we reported to Council on the 20th of June. If we deliver further savings, then that would contribute next year. But it depends what happens in terms of treasury management in the current year.
Okay, we now move on to paper 7, which is savings arising from early retirement decisions taken in 17-18. And again, I'd ask Mr Walker to introduce.
Thank you. Audit Scotland have recommended that elected members are informed of the costs incurred and savings generated in approving early retireals. This report summarises the financial implications of decisions taken between 1st of April 2017 and 31st of March 2018. The report sets out upfront costs of just under £1.9 million in order to generate recurring savings of around £1.3 million per year, which represents a payback period of just over 17 months. The committee is asked to note the contents of the report.
Okay, thank you, Mr Walker. In line with best practice from Audit Scotland, this report sets out the costs and savings of early retirement and voluntary redundancy decisions taken in the year 17-18 and is for noting. Any questions or comments? No, agree the paper. Thank you. Now on to paper 8, Cultural Trust Transformation Project. In June, we agreed the scope of a review of our 2 cultural trusts, Horsecross Arts and Culture Perth and Kinross, and asked for a progress report before final recommendations come to you in November. Whilst there are approved savings attached to this review, the key driver behind it is making the most of our substantial investment in culture. The project frontline delivery and meet our ambitions for cultural regeneration. The review is on track for completion to timescales, and I am advised that in June that we are very grateful to the board members and senior staff of both trusts who have engaged and been involved in the review. They have been prepared to challenge themselves as well as the Council on how things currently work and how we can jointly improve. The project team is now engaged with the options appraisal, which are in Appendix 2. There are no clear-cut conclusions from this review at this stage, but paras 2.9 and to 2.21 and 2.9 to 2.19, as stated in the first part of the report, highlight some key issues which have emerged so far. These include the latest position on business rates relief in para 2.13 and some important legal considerations in paras 2.17 and 2.21. Happy to take questions, and Fiona Robertson is the lead officer. Councillor McDade.
Thank you, Convener. My question is around 1.5, 1.6, around the different options that are being considered, and they focus heavily on a single cultural trust. My question is around, do we have evidence from elsewhere in the country that a single trust is successful, particularly for a city aspiring to be a city of culture, that it can be a very successful model? My understanding is other cities such as Edinburgh have a number of different schemes for their different arms, such as their theatres, a different one for the concert halls and the libraries. So do we have evidence that a single cultural trust would actually be successful for culture, which I think should be our priority here?
Okay, thank you. Fiona Robertson, to reply.
Thank you for the question, Councillor McDade. I think the short answer is it really depends on the context. So there are examples of single cultural trusts in Scotland, most notably Glasgow Life, which was in part set up because the 2014 Commonwealth Games were coming to Glasgow, and there was a need to put not just culture but also sport and leisure, all the skills and expertise and budgets in one place, so that Glasgow was well fitted, if you like, to deliver on the Games. Other examples include the Newcastle Gateshead initiative, which was set up specifically because Newcastle had bid for European Capital of Culture in 2008, and that was an example of not just two cultural organisations, but two cities coming together with a shared aim to implement a major cultural regeneration strategy for the north east of England. So the reason why this option is one of 6 options that we're looking at is that it works in some contexts, not in all contexts. And the job of the review team is to look impartially at all the different models that exist and try to ascertain what's going to be right for Perth and Kinross.
Okay, so supplementary.
Yes, please, Convener. So just out of curiosity, did we consider, for example, separating out? We have got a very successful theatre in Loch Festival Theatre, and that's quite a successful model. Did we consider looking at separating out further? I see that from 1.6, the 2 current allios requested that we consider full independence option, with the 2 of them remaining separate. Did we consider further options from that, where we might separate out Perth Theatre and Horsecross into 2 independent charities that could specialise in their area of expertise?
We have an option in the scope, which is to look at what we've just called a hybrid model of delivery. And the broad question that we're asking ourselves there, Councillor McDade, is I think the one that you're asking, which is actually should some of these functions be separated further, because it might just be more effective to have more of a federal delivery structure. I don't think we have a clear-cut answer on that at the moment. I personally have quite a mixed view on it. There are some key services, and public libraries are probably the best example of this, where economy of scale is quite important. So, we have some small public libraries in the rural areas which have 1 member of staff running them, and it's quite important that they're operating within a bigger structure. We also have some services, and the Perth Theatre is a really good example, where you require quite specialist skills to operate that building, and a whole range of specialist skills. I think one of the other areas that we are looking at in the context of your question, though, is some of the more generic functions like fundraising, where there is evidence from elsewhere that it is more effective. And the Newcastle Gateshead initiative, which I spoke of, is a really good example of this. It is more effective to have a single organisation fundraising from the private sector and other sources to deliver culture in an area, rather than have multiple organisations making multiple small asks to the same funders. So it's not just a question of would the theatres be better operated as a single organisation, would the libraries be better operated as a single organisation. There are also, as I say, some broader functions like fundraising, marketing, social media, where I think we need to consider where is it best to create an economy of scale.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you. First of all, I welcome this update. It's something we called for in June. I know there's also going to be a presentation to councillors internally in a few weeks' time before we make the final decision in November. But I just want to ask, first of all, in general on the project work, how much of it do you believe has been completed and how much further there is to go? And in particular, that relates to consultation with external bodies such as Ganachie Trust, Creative Scotland, Museums, Galleries Scotland, I'm sure Historic Environment Scotland, various others. But just how much of that work still has to be done?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Donaldson. The first thing the project team did was scope out and agree all the areas for investigation, you know, all the areas where we needed to gather evidence to support the findings for the review. That work is more or less done, and that really amounts to just under 50% of the work that we need to do. We've still got some follow-up areas on that which we're clarifying, but we are starting now on the detailed options appraisal, as the report states, and we'll be working on that for the next 2 to 3 weeks at least. In terms of engagement with external stakeholders, we have kept the bodies that you've mentioned there up to date. I think it's important to note, though, Councillor Donaldson, that particularly for the national bodies, specifically Creative Scotland, Museums, Galleries Scotland, they don't intervene directly in how local authorities choose to plan, manage and deliver cultural services. They regard that as very much an area of decision for the local authorities themselves. So we have kept them up to date with what we're doing. They are content with what we're doing. They understand why we're doing it, and we'll continue to keep them updated as we move towards some recommendations.
Supplementary?
Yeah. I know you stated earlier that a single unified trust may create better fundraising opportunities. I am very sceptical on that. A body, for instance, say like Heritage Lottery Fund, may well take the view that we're only going to make one grant to this body this year, whereas if you have two separate trusts, you actually may well enhance your fundraising opportunities.
That's an opinion, Councillor Donaldson.
It's a question, because I think it is.
It should be framed as a question.
I just want to ask Fiona Robertson's views on that.
Thank you. I'm happy to give my views on that. This is a question which has come up, as you would expect it to, in the review, and it's an important question because one of the objectives is to create a new delivery model that will maximise funding in the future. There is no strong evidence which suggests a single cultural trust will be disadvantaged in terms of approaches to other funding bodies. It does depend on the funding source, but Heritage Lottery Fund, for example, operate a whole range of grant programmes. Some of them Culture Perth and Kinross are eligible for, some of them Horsecross Arts are eligible for, some the council are eligible for. What's important from the lottery distributors in particular, from their point of view, is that they have a clear sense of organisations, working together in a local authority area and making strategic requests for funding. There is some evidence that to date we collectively, I probably include the council in that as well, haven't been as joined up as we might have been in terms of approaches to those funders, and that can actually just fragment those requests. All public funders and other funders, including Ganachie Trust, are coming under huge pressure. The Heritage Lottery Fund in particular is besieged by applications, so it is important that we look at, how effectively we raise money from these other sources in the future. But as is said in generally, and I would say specifically on your question, Councillor Donaldson, we've not reached any firm conclusion on that yet.
Councillor Duggan.
Thank you, Convener. I'm similarly unpersuaded about the benefits to fundraising from one organisation versus the other. In fact, quite the contrary would be my concern that CPK, a very well organised and very well administered ALIO, could be subject to the vagaries of Horsecross's economic roller coaster in coming years, and that's a very real threat for an organisation like CPK with such limited opportunities to generate income. Sticking with generating income, convener, my question is the £144,000 saving detailed in 1.3. I think, and I'd like advice on this. I think the ticket sales and catering operations of Horsecross alone could come close to satisfying that saving requirement if these two facilities were run in an optimal fashion. What do officers think of that proposition?
Fiona?
I think the report makes the point, and the final report will certainly make the point, Councillor Duggan, that both trusts can probably be thinking differently about how they generate income. Horsecross, as you know, has taken on a whole new bit of the business in the last 12 months. It's reopened Perth Theatre. It is still working through how it's marketing, its pricing policy, how it generates income in other ways, needs to operate. And officers are working quite closely with Horsecross on how and where they can improve in that respect. In terms of your broader question about is it possible, if you're asking is it possible for these services to become less reliant on public funding in the future, that's a difficult question to answer. It's not a question necessarily for officers, but what is clear from all the evidence and all the reports at UK level that have been carried out on the future of funding for the arts is that a level of public funding will always be required, particularly for core services like public libraries, which are free universal services.
Councillor Sheila McCall.
Thank you, Convener. My question is on the options appraisal table on page 139. I find that while the headlines are there, the detailed evaluation criteria don't seem to be included, and more importantly, how the criteria will be marked specifically and what's acceptable and what's not. I think there's a danger that if these aren't defined early enough, the respective values will not be in a position to address the specific criteria that the board will be considering, and furthermore that we may get a recommendation based on subjective rather than objective outcomes. So if you could perhaps explain the sub-criteria underneath the headings, that would be helpful, and how they will be scored.
Thank you for the question, Councillor McCall. Would you like me to explain all of the sub-criteria? Yep. Do you mind if I sit down while I do that? So I'll go through them one by one and then maybe further questions at the end. Would that be okay? Worth saying that the criteria have been developed by the project team and also by the project board who approved them about a month ago. So sub-criteria 1, which is customers, this is one that we start with very often when we're doing a transformation review of this kind. Although we have to deliver savings from this review, the starting point is how do we improve services? Are there opportunities to improve services for customers? 2, strategic alignment. We have a cultural strategy. Sorry, is this what you're looking for, Councillor McCall, before I go on?
This seems like a statement of what the headlines are. Normally in an options appraisal there'd be detailed criteria underneath against which a response from the participants would be measured, and there would be a scoring
Oh, I see,
mechanism
yes,
to measure
apologies.
against them.
Yeah, sorry, I misunderstood your question. Yes, there is a detailed scoring criteria which sits underneath this, which we discussed at project team level, and I'm happy to talk you through that, if that would be useful.
I think it would have been helpful to have had this included as part of the report so we could understand it, and perhaps it might be helpful to circulate it to the committee members if that's agreeable, Convener.
I think it is, yes. I think that, shortly we'll be receiving update from officers to all councillors, and we'll certainly have it at that point, if not before.
We have an update session with councillors on the 24th of September where we'll be going through this.
Thank you, Convener. I think too often the outcomes of these evaluations come to committee prior to councillors having any opportunity to even look at or consider whether or not the evaluation criteria are fair or have merit or acceptable, and by which time it's very often too late because the deed has been done. So I welcome that it will be coming ahead on the 24th of September. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor McCall. Councillor McDade? You indicated earlier. Okay.
I can ask another question. I have plenty.
Councillor Lane's itching to ask one, so we'll let him carry on just now.
Thanks, Convener. My question is, the fact that the administration's already accepted that we'll be taking 294,000 from the ALIOs in the upcoming years, is that achievable for them and still providing services without forcing them down the amalgamation route of one cultural trust? Would it not have been better possibly to do this without the Savings Act's threat hanging over them, and we might have got a slightly different outcome?
I don't have a response to that other than I think we're reviewing the proposals just now and the options just now, but I'll leave Fiona to answer more fully.
Yes, thank you for the question, Councillor Lang. I mean, all I can say is that, you know, as with all transformation reviews, there are generally approved savings which we need to find. The question on whether it's achievable, that's why we're doing the review. In terms of your question about is it absolutely essential that we amalgamate two existing organisations, as the report states, that's not a foregone conclusion. What we're trying to find a way towards is achieving these savings whilst protecting frontline services. In my view, from the evidence that we have found so far, there is scope for trusts, both the existing trusts, to collaborate more strongly on some of the back office services and some of the corporate functions. Now, whether that happens by creating a single cultural trust or whether it happens by both the organisations continuing as they are but working more strongly together is something that we still need to consider.
Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you. I'm going to leave the question on the financial position until the 24th of September, and it is quite complicated, and also the legal position. But at this stage, I'm very much on page 126. At the very top, it states, opportunities to commercialise some services. And you give one example of family ancestral history. Can I ask, do you have other possibilities for that you're looking at to commercialise, in particular our libraries?
Thanks for the question, Councillor Donaldson. The suggestion around commercialising and charging for some ancestral history services actually came from Culture Perth and Kinross themselves in one of the workshops that we have been running with both the ALIOs over the summer to support the review. In terms of opportunities to commercialise services in libraries, no such suggestions have come forward to that effect.
Councillor Lane, you had a supplementary. Well, that's...
I have actually forgotten. The good thing is, and the fortunate, maybe by happen chance, is that we do have CPK coming to scrutiny this afternoon, so we'll be able to ask them how they feel the review's moving forward. Thanks.
Councillor McDade.
I do have a question this time, very quickly. We talk about looking at the staff profile, and I'm aware that the sort of senior staff from the different ALIOs have been involved in discussing the overarching ideas. My question is whether there will be a staff survey of all the staff affected by this about how they would feel about working for a single organisation, in terms of, obviously, a key part of any business and the success of a business is having staff that are engaged and happy at their work and wanting to do more. If we find that actually the staff would be less keen to work for an overall single trust and therefore less engaged, not basically playing as big a part as they might otherwise, that could have a negative effect on the savings consequence. So will there be a staff survey that will be looking at these sorts of options?
Thanks for the question. Just to say that responsibility for consulting with and engaging and keeping their staff updated in the two ALIOs lies with the chief executives of the two ALIOs, Councillor McDade, not with the council. And both chief executives have been doing that. So they've had regular update sessions with their staff. They actually, for the first time, brought the staff of both organisations together in July for a general update and to talk to staff about how they were feeling. This transformation review has been on the table for a number of years now, so it's not entirely new to staff. I think also worth saying that, particularly in the case of Culture Perth and Kinross, which is a relatively new ALIO, previously it was an in-house council service, and that service had gone through very significant transformation before it became a trust. So I think, you know, whether you work in a council department or whether you work in an arm's length body, change, you know, is a constant. And in my experience of the staff in both organisations, which is fairly extensive, they recognise that and up for engaging in that.
Okay, thank you very much. Any further comments? Councillor Duggan?
Yeah, thanks. Comments. Convener, we heard it a little bit today in some of the responses that we've had, and I think we should really draw a line under the implication that Perth Theatre is somehow a burden on Horse Cross. I've heard this one too many times. It didn't arrive overnight. It didn't drop from space. It was a well-planned project that had years in gestation and delivery. And I'm hearing that time and time again that Horse Cross are working through how to best optimise this and how to get that up and running. It should be far, far beyond that just now. Any other organisation, private sector or public sector, who had a tremendous increase in their capacity would be making very good use of that. And I'm just not certain that Horse Cross are doing that. And in addition, Convener, in Perth and Kinross, our eggs are now in a very expensive cultural basket, and I'm worried on the basis of this report that we've got our head not reaching for the sky, but down in the weeds, scratching around, looking for 100,000 here and another 100,000 there. It seems to me very important now that we take a change of tack, and that rather than worry about the day-to-day administering of this, that and the next thing between Horse Cross and CPK, we should get a business consultant in there, a business advisor with executive authority to get them to maximise what are really very expensive assets which aren't being used by any measure to their optimum scale. And I wonder if you could undertake, Convener, or at least admit, or at least agree to have a look at with the new chief executive about a slight change of tack about how we approach this, because there is a fantastic organisation there waiting to come through, and I'm not certain that we're going to do it by looking for 100,000 here and another 50,000 there. It needs to be a far, far higher gaze than that which we're adopting in this paper.
Thank you for your comments, Councillor Duggan. I am aware that this has been, as you know, on the table for some time, and some of the comments were highlighted by your own members this morning. But I am happy to take on board your comments. I think it's a very worthwhile exercise, particularly as we've got a new chief executive in the room. And I'm still intending to proceed with this process, because I don't think it would be appropriate to abort that, but it's quite competent suggestion that we have a look at it with a new chief executive in place. Councillor McDade.
Thank you, Convener. I would agree with what Councillor Duggan's just said, but I also have quite strong views on, I think there needs to be a long-term strategy to make certain parts of this more sustainable and independent from the council, in particular Horse Cross and the theatre, and I think that's a viable thing. I think there is evidence elsewhere that can be done. I don't think libraries will ever make a profit, so that's something that we have a risk of. If we put everything into one cultural basket, we could be a jack of all trades and a master of none. And I think that when you're coming to things like theatres, which are very expensive, but have the opportunity to be very successful, as PFT is and others around the country, then we have an opportunity to make actually much bigger savings potentially in the longer term, but that might come at a short-term restructuring cost. And I think that's kind of where I would be hoping this review will take us.
I agree with that entirely, and I think governance is critical, is really what you're saying, and that's my view entirely, and we'll take that forward. Okay. Thank you. Can we agree the paper? Okay. Move on to paper 9, which is the transformation programme. This is finding new ways of doing things and transforming services and support that we offer to our local residents, and it continues to be a priority for this council. In these unprecedented times of change, we face many challenges, which means we need to be flexible, creative and innovative in the way we deliver services. Understanding the current and future needs of our population and working with them and a wide range of stakeholders to build sustainable services. This report summarises our progress so far, highlighting the key achievements in those areas and the continuing challenges to us. We have heard about exciting new initiatives which are now part of this transformation programme and which are expected to bring substantial change and innovation across key areas. We look forward to hearing more about them as they develop, and I commend the paper to you. Do we have any questions? We don't. Can we agree the paper? Thank you. Paper 10 is the Corporate and Democratic Services Business Management Improvement Plan. The Business Management and Improvement Plan, which is before councillors today, reflects a backdrop of an ambitious national reform agenda, significant financial constraints, increasing demand for services, and unprecedented levels of regulation and scrutiny. As a result, the public sector landscape within which the council operates has become increasingly complex and challenging. In recent years, for example, we have seen radical reform in relation to adult health and social care services, with the creation of new statutory partnerships. The role of communities and the status of community planning partnerships have been enhanced through legislation which demands greater community engagement and empowerment. In terms of national policy, there is a drive towards decentralisation of decision-making to locality-based planning and delivery, a shift in the focus from response to prevention and early intervention, and greater partnership working and collaboration. As a result, local authorities and other public bodies have had to rethink how we do business. Corporate and democratic services offer a wide and varied specialist and technical support and advice and supporting enabling transformation and change. We make sure our services offer best value and they are sustainable to meet future challenges. The plan before you includes the CAD's key priorities, all of which contribute to and ensure the council delivers its 5 strategic priorities. I'm happy to recommend this report, and Mr. Valentine may have comments to make.
Thank you, Convener. I don't have a lot to say. The Corporate and Democratic Services team are a team which is often a big part of the council, but it's hidden away. It's not front and centre for the major part of the support for the council and the wider communities which we all support. That's all I wanted to say. I'm happy to take any questions.
Do we have any questions? No. Can we agree the report? Comments? Apologies.
Thank you, Convener. It seems somewhat counterintuitive that the report comes to scrutiny after it's been approved here. I don't know what can be done about scheduling, but I would expect scrutiny to have an input and then bring that to this committee before they approve the report. So perhaps something can be considered in the future of doing these things that way around.
Okay, I'll take your comments on board. Thank you. Councillor Lane?
It's just a comment as well. Although everybody in CADS does an important job, I'd just like to put my thanks and good wishes to the way that they perform as the customer service centre, who are the team who meeting people often in difficult circumstances, meeting them face to face. And I've seen them in action when I've been along at Puller House and downstairs here, and I think that they do a wonderful job as the first point of contact for many people.
Yep. Thank you very much for that, Councillor Lane, and I'll see that these comments are passed on. Thank you.